Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338, or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. This week, we have the mastermind behind the 100 Acts of Love brand that equips companies and loved ones with essential tools to deal with grief. We have Kim Hamer. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you, LeTroy. It's good to be here. It's always funny if you say mastermind. I'm like, okay.
Well, you are, you know.
No, you're right. It's funny. You're right. It is a title I can claim, but it just always sounds like the mastermind.
The guru.
The guru.
Yeah. So Kim has, some meaningful work that she's been doing with 100 Acts of Love. And, I just want to share this story and, allow her the platform to do so. So just tell us about what inspired you to launch 100 Acts of Love.
Sure. So it was inspired about, I'm going to say 7 days. Was it 7 days? 7 days, 10 days after my husband was diagnosed with cancer. Healthy man, 6'6", 235, living our LA lives of, trying to raise good humans and, trying to brave LA traffic, eating well and healthy, have a very active lifestyle. And he started to complain that he couldn't breathe. And we were on vacation. He had this horrible cough and he was running these really mild fevers. And so we were treating it with cough syrup and ibuprofen. And for those of you who want to know, that is not a good way to treat cancer. It did not stop it in its tracks. And a couple of weeks later, we came home, he went for a run, really was struggling breathing, ended up making an appointment with a doctor. And both of us knew something was wrong because right when he told me that he had made this appointment, I had said, I really want to go with you. And he had said, I'm glad you said that because I was going to ask you to come with me. And it was in that doctor's office that we got the news that it was cancer. They couldn't tell exactly what kind of cancer. And he really even couldn't confirm that it was cancer because they had to do a biopsy. But the x-ray that they showed us, the reason he was having trouble breathing is because there was these white spots all over his lungs. And it turned out it was stage 4 large B-cell lymphoma. And the reason that there was in his lungs is because it had jumped his lymph nodes and was already on different parts of his body. So that's very bad. You don't want the cancer to do that. You don't want to catch it at that stage. And that Sunday, he started chemo. And I remember thinking, we had 3 small children at the time, and I was making a living as a freelance writer. And I remember thinking, I can't do this all by myself. I just can't. And I called a very good friend of mine, a friend I used to bike with, and said, is there any way you can take off of work tomorrow? And can you come sit with me and help me figure out what I need? Because I know I need help. I just don't know what it is. And that's really where the start of this 100 Acts of Love started, was really understanding that I knew I need help, but I didn't know what kind of help I needed. So fast forward, my husband beat the cancer. He really, when he was sick, it was a very unsaid rule that his job was to focus on living and my job was to hold down the fort, do everything I could to hold down the fort. The other thing about my husband, he was very much a co-parent. And so, it was a very difficult transition, not only because I was watching my husband go through this horrific experience, but it was also difficult because I became, in essence, sort of like a single parent. He was on a chemo regimen that would have him kind of coherent for about 3 of every 14 days. And so it was a really tough time, but he beat it, which was fantastic. And I know that most people think when you beat cancer, there's these kind of celebrations and you're excited and you've got a new lease on life and you're going to go do that bungee jumping thing you've always said you're going to do. Unfortunately, that's not what happened in our case. In our case, we literally, can I swear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In our case, we would literally lie in bed sometimes and look at each other and go, what the fuck just happened? Like, it was the perfect word for that experience. And we had to rebuild our marriage. And for a while there, we weren't sure that we should still remain married. At that point, I think we'd been married for 9 years. So it was, we were in it already. And so we spent about 6, and he was also dealing with side effects of chemo. I think the idea that people say, oh, you're done with chemo. Well, the chemo still has side effects in your body, depending on what kind you have, that can last for several years. For him, it lasted for about 8 months, 6 to 8 months. So we did decide that we were going to stay together, and we were slowly rebuilding our lives and getting past scans, because you get scans to make sure the cancer isn't coming back. And then the scans get further and further apart, which means, you start to feel like a normal person again. And we had a scan in October 2008, and it came back clean. And 3 weeks later, my husband started not feeling well. And then another 2 weeks after that, it was very clear that he was sick again. He went back, and the doctor said, you can't be, like, you can't be. We just did scans. There's no way. And we ended up taking him to the hospital because he was having trouble breathing, and he was having trouble breathing because there was a blood clot, because he'd been sitting so much over the holidays. And then 4 months after that, was in January, and 4 months after that, he died. The cancer was back, and he died. So that's sort of how the whole thing started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Art.
And that's so sweet, LeTroy. That's I have to tell you, I have done over 100 podcast interviews, and no one has ever said that. That's really sweet. I'm putting that down as just something to say. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm always thinking about the human side of everything, and just the gravity of, like, hearing that news and the uncertainty of your fate. And then in your shoes, as far as you have these grand plans, seeing your kids walk across the stage, graduating, getting married, starting a family, the two of you becoming grandparents together. And then all of a sudden, the news hits you like a ton of bricks. And then you're sort of like in scramble mode, wondering, your head is spinning. And obviously the first priority is trying to be strong for him. But, sometimes your emotions and well-being takes a back seat because of that. And then also just trying to make sure the kids are staying strong, or if they're having their moments, you trying to stay strong for them. So it's just that human element. And when you say your vows, like,
yes,
through sickness and health till death do us part, you say it, but when reality strikes, it's just another ball game. So
right.
yeah, just talk about that.
I mean, I think you have used so many good valid points. I think I think one thing I do want to point out is my kids didn't know what cancer was. And I remember we made a big deal about telling them. Like, we waited all weekend because we didn't want them to upset their plans. We got all these soccer games to get to, whatever it was. And we sat them down on Sunday night, and my husband had asked me to tell them because he was afraid he was going to start to cry. And I say the words, and of course he starts to cry, and I start to cry, and the kids start to cry. And then my oldest, who was 9 at the time, he's got this quizzical look on his face, and his eyes got really big, and he stopped crying. And you got this furrowed brow, and he goes, "But what's cancer?" And the kids were going off our emotions, but they had no idea what cancer was. We had not had any experience from that before. And the same thing happened when he was diagnosed the second time. The kids didn't think anything of it because they thought people lived after cancer. It's like, clearly cancer is something that happens to some people. And when they get sick, they kind of, they get sick and they do some weird things. And sometimes they get mean from the medicine that they're taking. But the idea that someone would die didn't cross their minds because it wasn't something that they knew. So I think that's always very interesting. And, they always say, the psychologists say about kids that you should give them information, equal to what they want to know. But we just made all these assumptions that I didn't realize until hindsight. And I think the other thing too, I think one of the mistakes that Art and I made was trying to be strong for each other. When, I didn't want him to feel bad because of all the pressure that I was under. And he didn't want me to feel bad for taking care of him. And so we hid from each other. And I don't think that that was the best use of our relationship. I think that's probably one of the reasons that we had issues the first time after he, got finished with cancer. He was filled with so much guilt from being a burden. And we never talked about that. And I was pissed off, honestly, because I was like, you know what? No, this wasn't, I know sickness and health, but this is not what I had in mind. And I was mad because I felt like, this cancer, you left me, and this is not part of it. This is not why I married you.
Right.
And we did have a conversation about that afterwards. And we did spend some time in therapy talking to a marriage counselor about those feelings. And, so I think that was a mistake that we made, that we really should have been more open with each other, because I don't think, even though in the moment, it feels like, no, I don't want to burden him with this. He could have comforted me, and I could have comforted him, right? I could have said, you know what, sweetheart, I love you. And yeah, sometimes it's a pain in the ass, but I'm so grateful that I get to be of service to you, that I get to help you, that I get to do all these things for you, and so, but he didn't, I didn't tell him that till after he was, after that first diagnosis. So I think you're right. It is a very human experience. It's not very unique. I think there are more people dealing with grief out there than we recognize and that we care for. And I think, my goal at that time, what I noticed, especially, a couple of years after he died, I was mad for a while. I was really mad at some people who didn't show up. And I think I have not talked to a single person who has not had a very similar experience, where people we think are going to show up for us don't. And people who we don't even know very well all of a sudden become our best friends because they show up for us. And so I spent a couple of years being very mad about that. And then I realized that most of those people who didn't show up were afraid, and that I just listened to this podcast and they talked about regret. And most people regret not being kind. And it's not because they're mean, and it's not because they're thinking mean thoughts. It's because they get so focused on their competency. They feel like they don't know what to do or what to say, that they don't do anything. And that causes them a lot of regret. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to understand how to get past that feeling of lack of competency. And how to have these very solid action steps that someone could take right now for somebody that they care about, and know that they could be helpful.
Okay. So speaking of the book, it provides practical tips for supporting someone with cancer or going through a loss. Feel free to share some of those examples.
Sure. So the book is made up into several different chapters, and each chapter has a theme to it. So there's a chapter on food, and it doesn't have to do with cooking or dropping, just a little bit have to drop off food. And I'll go back there. There's a chapter on helping when they have kids. There's a chapter on helping if you don't live nearby. There's a chapter on helping if you're working with them. So the idea is that you'll be able to flip open the book. One of my favorite tips from this book was leave a cooler by their front door. Something that we don't understand when we drop off food for somebody, we often want to have a conversation with them. How are you? What's going on? Like, we want to talk to them. And the energy level of the person may not be in a place where they're going to feel like they want to talk, but they feel obligated to talk because you just dropped off food.
Right.
And if you leave a cooler by the front door, then the person who is receiving gets to decide whether or not they want to engage if they're home. And it's such a simple little tip that provides a lot of relief for somebody, right? So you can, no matter, even if you live in an apartment, as long as it's a safe apartment, you can leave something by the front door. And I think that's the thing about helping is we want to be helpful, but we also don't want to be a pain in the ass. And so that's a great way to be helpful and not be a pain in the ass. One of my favorite stories that I tell every time I speak is about my neighbor Nate, who wandered up the street one day and knocked on my door, and this is after Art died, and said, "When was the last time the oil was changed in your car?" And I was like, "Cars have oil?" and and he said, "Yes, they do." And I said I couldn't tell him. I didn't know whether the light was on or not. I was in the middle of, I don't remember, I was 6 months out maybe at that point. He said, "I'll tell you what, leave the keys in the mailbox. I'm gonna be home all day tomorrow. Put the keys in the mailbox, text me, I'll come grab the car, I'll do it for you." And I said, "Okay." And the first part of that tip is really helpful because I didn't have to see him. And oftentimes when you are on the receiving end of being given lots of gifts, it feels like you're not thankful enough. For me, that was my experience. Like I felt like I couldn't say thank you enough to people. Like, "Oh my God, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." I couldn't feel like I was grateful enough. And that could be very painful for the person who was giving, but it could also be very painful for me. And so just by the hint of leaving the keys in the mailbox, he relieved me of that pressure. It was like the cooler by the front door type of thing.
Right.
So I go get in the car, and so he's dropped off the keys. He's texted me, let me know the car is back. I grab the keys, everything's fine. I go to get in the car with the kids, and I walk out, and the car looks different. And I get in, and I start to cry, and I turn the car on, and I start to sob, because not only did he have the oil changed in the car, he had the car cleaned inside and out, and he had filled it with gas. And it was such a simple little tip, the filling it with gas. When you're going through something really hard, doing simple things takes gargantuan effort. So remembering to look at the gas gauge, that was something that I almost ran out of gas several times early on. I mean, I shouldn't have been allowed to drive that first month after he died.
Right.
But I almost ran out of gas several times. So that's the first thing. The second thing is he relieved something. Even if someone said, "What can I do to help?" I would have felt stupid asking someone to fill my car with gas when I'm sitting at home. Right? Because it just felt like it's so easy. Just go get the car, go to the gas station, but it's not easy when you're going through difficulties. It takes a lot of effort. So he relieved that from me as well. And just the washing of the car was so sweet. A couple months after that, a year later, I went down and knocked on his door. I was just thinking about him, and we'd seen each other quite a bit since then, but I was just thinking about him, and I went down and I said, "I just want to let you know how helpful that was that you did that for me. Like really, really, really helpful." And he gave me this big hug, and he said, "Kim, I want to thank you." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You allowed me to feel like I was useful, like I was doing something that was helping you on this journey." And it was a really good reminder for anyone who's listening who doesn't like to receive help. It's not about us. It's not always about us. It's about letting people feel really good and connected because they're helping you during a really difficult time in your life. So I do want to share one tip for everybody, if I can.
Go ahead.
So it's the first, right? You're going to say, no, you can't.
No, I can't.
Yeah, we got too many questions.
The floor is yours.
So one thing it's the only tip in the book that has its very own chapter. It's the very first one. And it even says, if you take nothing from this book, take this tip. And that is, do not say, "If you need anything, let me know." Now, I'm pretty sure that 99% of your audience has said that to somebody at some point, and it is our go-to phrase, and we think it's really, really helpful. But the truth is, it's the least helpful thing you can say. And there are 4 specific reasons for that. One of the things you want to do when someone's in crisis is you want to connect with them. You want to remind them that they're not alone, that you feel them, even if you don't understand exactly what they're going through. It's like, "Hey, human, I see that you're having a really human experience, and I'm really sorry for that," right? So we want to connect. That phrase doesn't connect. It doesn't matter how soft and gentle we say it. It just doesn't you're not paying attention to what the person is going through. And that's something that we all need. We all need witnesses to the good things that happen in our lives, weddings and anniversaries and everything else, and the bad things that happen in our lives, cancer and death and everything, and loss of job. We all need witnesses. So the second reason it's not helpful is, LeTroy, what is anything?
Mm-hmm.
Like, anything's just too big a word. When my husband was first diagnosed, I had a toddler. Did anything mean that you're going to take your brand new just cleaned BMW up to the preschool to pick up my vomiting toddler? Or did anything mean that you were happy to drop off a bottle of wine or a 6-pack of beer, right? So anything is too big a word for anyone to get there. And even in the moment, we often mean anything. Like if you had said to me, Kim, if you had said to me, if I said to you, I'll do anything, and you said, well, I really need this caviar from the small town in Russia, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go get it. But then I would have walked away and going, I can't afford tickets. I don't speak Russian. I don't even know where to go. I mean, this is a huge undertaking. But in the moment, I felt like I would have tried to do it for you. So anything, although we mean it, sometimes in the moment, it's often too big a word. The third reason it's not helpful is you have inadvertently put the pressure on the person you're trying to help. And that is, you've asked them to come up with something that they think you will do for them. And that's a lot of pressure. And they're in the middle of this crisis. And honestly, it's like I said, I didn't know what I needed. I knew I needed help, but I had no idea what kind of help it was. So, you've now put the pressure on them. And then the last reason it's not helpful is, God bless this country. And actually most I've spoken to someone in every country, almost every country, except for like the middle, the Eastern, the Asian countries. So
Right.
to speak to someone in Korea, where asking for help is really hard. None of us are very good at it.
Yeah, I was going to get into that.
Yeah. So now you're asking someone who's in an extremely vulnerable position to ask you to do something that you may not want to do. They're not going to do it. So that's why that phrase is not a good phrase. But talk.
Oh, yeah.
Troy.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, the grieving process, it's not a one size fits all model. So like in your case, the way you grieve, you might not want to jump out of the bed for a week or two, or there isn't even a set parameter on how long a person is going to grieve. So it's hard to kind of get a read on a person that's grieving. Like, you don't want to push too hard, or
yes,
like you said in your case with some of the people that didn't reach out at all.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they wanted to, they just didn't know how, or as you provided with the last example, they don't know how to ask. So it's tough all around, I feel. And I know 100 Acts of Love is making it easier for everyone to do so.
I certainly hope so. I really want people to know how important they are in their person's life. And I think we often take for granted what we mean to people. We actually don't even take it for granted because we don't understand it, because the person hasn't told us, right? I mean, our friends don't go around telling us how wonderful we are. They just don't. They're like, hey, you want to go out? Sure, let's go out. Oh, you're so funny. We just hang out. But no one goes around making a list of how important we are to them. And what we forget is that importance when it comes to a crisis is, you may think you don't have anything to offer, but maybe you're the friend who always makes them laugh. And that's the thing you have to offer. So that's the other side of that is, make sure that you use a phrase and connect with them. And you can say, I'm so sorry this is happening. It's an okay thing to say. It doesn't feel very powerful because we want to get in and fix it, but it's a really great thing to say. Another great phrase is, I don't even know what to say, right? I mean, the information you just told me just left me breathless. I don't even know what to say. Like, that's really powerful. And then be specific on how you can help. What is it that you're willing to do? And we all have things that we're really good at that if someone offered to pay us for it, we'd be like, don't pay me. It's like so easy for me to do. Right. But those things are of great value and can be of great value to your person. So take the time to figure out what those things are.
Okay. Yeah. So 100 Acts of Love is also a valuable tool for the workplace. So just talk about some of the common misconceptions or misunderstandings about supporting someone with cancer or loss in the workplace.
Yeah, we could be on here for another whole half an hour. Just giving you a heads up.
Do your thing. Do your thing.
So yes, at work, it is a very difficult situation. I first want to shout out to all the managers out there. If there's any managers or leaders who are listening or supervisors listening to this, because y'all are getting the short end of the stick right now. Right now, we're putting a lot of pressure on our leaders and our supervisors to not only just meet the goals that they need to meet, the monthly, weekly, whatever goals, but now they need to make sure their employees are engaged, that they're well taken care of, they have good well-being, and that they have happy mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a lot for a manager to deal with, and most managers do not get any kind of training in this. So in the workplace, work is quickly becoming one of the only places where we consistently meet as a group. 50 years ago, there were, the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, the Women's Club, the YMCA, all these places that we would all meet, and those institutions have slowly disappeared. And so we're not meeting consistently at a place where we can make connections with people. And work is now becoming that place. And that is a problem, because work, we get paid to do something, and we get paid to, to show up and do this work. And so when you have something like this, managers are very ill-equipped to handle it. So here's a couple of things I often tell managers to do. The first thing is, make sure you talk about it. I have something called the North Star strategy, where I work teams through it, or I speak on it. Make sure that you talk about it. One of the worst things you can do is, like I said in the beginning, is ignoring it. Right. So you don't want to do the old, if you need anything, let me know. You also don't want to do the old, we're just not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about Tom's death, or we're not going to talk about the fact that Tom's wife died, or we're not going to talk about the fact that Tom is losing his hair and he's only been working 2 days a week. We're just going to kind of go along with it. Now, of course, you have to check in with Tom about how much information he wants to disclose at work about what's happening. But it's really important that the manager address the issue with the employee and also with the team. The team wants to help. They need direction, just like everybody else. They need support and understanding what they can and cannot do. I think what we do is we forget that, or when we cross that line, that personal professional line, it's actually something that more and more employees are desiring in a way that fits who they are. So some employees are happy to have other employees come by their house and drop off lasagna. Other employees are like, you can bring it to work and my friend will come pick it up, and we'll bring you back the dish later. So it's really understanding how to be supportive, and that requires managers to have courageous conversations. And what I mean by that is, managers are not comfortable saying, hey, Tom or Alice, I understand that you have cancer. Let's talk about how we can support you in this organization. So I have a few questions for you. One, tell me about your regimen. Tell me about how often you're going to be able to work. You can't ask them about the specifics of the regimen, whether they're going to be on chemo or what they're going to be doing. Are they getting surgery? You can't ask that. But what you can say is, how many days in the week in the week do you think you're going to be in the office? Okay, let's talk about what you have on your plate right now. Let's talk about the work you have. Let's talk about how much work you want to do, what you think you're going to be able to get done. Let's talk about support. Look, your coworkers are really going to want to help you. Here are some suggestions on how I think they can help you, but let's brainstorm on some other ones, or let's go to HR, because they're supposed to be equipped with understanding this. So let's find out from HR what the company normally does in these situations, and if they have any ideas. But it requires a head-on approach, not this kind of like, and it's a difficult topic. Nobody wants to talk about, the death of a partner. Nobody wants to see their coworker crying in their seat or crying on a Zoom call. The other piece that I work on with managers is understanding how to have those kind of conversations consistently. Because if you don't, like when chemo starts, the person on day one of chemo, if let's say they have 6 rounds, is going to be very different than the person who shows up after the 3rd round, right? Their ability to do work and how much work they can do is probably going to change. And so you need to be able to, as a manager, be able to have those conversations saying, hey, I'm noticing this. let's talk about maybe taking this thing off your plate or something else off your plate. Common mistakes I see managers make are, one, they don't have those conversations, and two, they remove almost all the projects off of somebody's plate, which is one of the most disheartening things that can happen to somebody dealing with cancer or loss. Because what we forget is sometimes that workspace that we're in is the thing that gets them out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not feeling like we all want to contribute, and if I feel like I'm not contributing because my boss took all the great projects off my plate, it's going to be really hard for me to re-engage when I get better. It's going to be really hard for me to engage now when I'm only working part-time. So I think those are kind of the two biggest mistakes I see managers make.
Okay. All right. So Kim, just talk about that process, dealing with the grief, and you specifically dealing with the grief and going through the myriad of emotions that you dealt with, and then coming to the point where you had that light bulb moment that everything that I've encountered, I want to pour into helping others.
I don't know that there was a light bulb moment. I just think that there was a moment where I knew I needed, I don't really even know how to explain it. I just knew I needed to do something. I wrote the book. I joke around that I wrote the book for myself so that I would remember what to do when someone else I knew had cancer. I mean, that was sort of the joke I made for myself. I realized that there was so the grief was horrific. I'll be totally honest. It was not, I remember saying, I don't wish that on my worst enemy, but really I could have, and then my husband died. And I really said, I don't care how much I hate you. I never want anyone to feel this way again. Right. This is just horrible. And it's the problem with grief is that it's not visible. I mean, there was a while, especially in that first 6 months, where I wanted to wear a black band around my arm, just so people, like they used to do, in Civil War, pre-Civil War, just so people knew that I was grieving. Because I wanted people to know I am not in a normal space. I'm really struggling. I'm having a hard time. And also I wanted to know that there were other people who were feeling the same way. So that was that. So that's sort of what happened. I was in a support group, which was very, very, very helpful. It was really helpful to have my grief normalized. There were times somebody would say something and I'd be like, did you sneak into my house and read my journal? Because that's exactly what I wrote. I also went to these events called Camp Widow, Soaring Spirits International Foundation. She does camps all over the world now. And it was a weekend camp. It was part workshop, part social event, and part support group. It was the most amazing thing I've ever done. And I kept going back for many, many years because that was really helpful to me as well. I think having friends who didn't question my process, there's always someone out there telling you, it's time for you to put his clothes away. It's time for you to, it's time for you to get over this and start dating. It's time for you to, and that's their version of what they think I was. And what I also noticed is none of those people who told me that were widows. So everyone has their own idea of what you should do when someone dies. And it's irrelevant. It's completely 100% irrelevant. So that was sort of painful to listen to people pass judgment on what I should and shouldn't be doing right now, or aren't I over that yet? Especially at the year mark. Someone asked me, it was a couple of days after a couple of days after the year mark, and someone said, well, it's been a year, so now you can move on. And it was like, no, like I don't know how to move on. One thing I did the day after Art died, I started counting days. Like the day after he died was day 1, and then day 2. And one of my friends said, that seems like really morbid. And I realized I was counting days because I knew that at some point I reached a day where I wouldn't be in so much pain. I didn't know if that was going to be day 50. I didn't know if it was going to be day 367 or 10,054. I had no idea, but I knew, I just had the faith that at some point I would not be in as much pain as I was in. And I was right. And I don't remember what day I got to, but I remember it was way past the 2-year mark. So I think it's, as a person grieving, it's very difficult. And then as a mother, having your kids grieve is also very difficult. There's this omnipresence about being a mother. Mothers are revered, and we're supposed to stand up strong and be able to do all sorts of things for our children. And which I think is very mixed messages, because it's not very fair to women to put that kind of pressure on us. But the one thing I couldn't do for them, right? I mean, I could not bring their father back. And that was and even now it's really difficult. My kids are 26, 23, and 21. They're not kids. And yet there are times that we do things and I think, damn it, I really wish your father was here, because he would have loved to see you do this.
Right.
The other side is, I had an incident a couple of weeks ago. I was applying to be a speaker, and I've written out an application. It just didn't feel right. And that's something that art would have always helped me with. So I called my youngest son, who's a great writer, and I said, hey, can you help me wordsmith this a little bit more? And we spent 15 minutes working on a Google Doc, and he did a great job. He helped me really clarify a few things. It was wonderful. And I was like, oh, it's too bad your dad's not here, because, he would have loved to see you do this. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, if Art were here, I never would have called my son.
Right.
Because I would have had Art. And so there's these blessings, there's these moments that come forward that are just so sweet and so wonderful. I mean, just be able to rely on him, to know I can rely on my kids for some of these things. It's just amazing. But my husband had to die for that to happen. And so I think, I definitely want people to know that there are, I don't like silver linings, because that implies that there's an inside silver thing. So it's not a silver lining, but there are these little gift boxes that occur after death. The trick with the gift boxes, though, and they are the person who's grieving or the person who's going through their thing. It's their thing to discover. It is not ours to tell them what it will be, which is what sometimes we do. You'll be fine. And when this happens, you can get remarried. Or, you're having cancer. It's going to make you just really appreciate life more. That is not your job. Your job is never to point out someone else's silver lining. It's to support them as they discover the silver linings.
So what did you discover about yourself?
The totally cliche that I'm much stronger than I thought I was. That I can write. I never thought I'd write a book. I never thought that I could. I never thought I would get it published. I just didn't think that. And I think the biggest thing I discovered is how resilient I am. You don't discover resilience by sitting quietly in your room. You discover it by getting hit on the head and getting back up, and getting hit on the shoulder and getting back up, and get punched in the stomach and getting back up. I mean, and I didn't, in the middle of it, I would never have said, I'm going to be resilient. It wasn't like, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to be resilient. It was like, I don't know what to do, but I do have to get up because the kids are coming home. And I had to get up because dinner's burning. Right? I mean, it was sometimes that immediate. But I didn't recognize that just getting up was another way that I was building resiliency in myself. Right. So I think those are all the things that I learned. And I also learned that I can love fiercely. I think I spent a lot of time reflecting on our marriage and how lucky I was to be married to him. But now I know, whoever I end up with, I'm going to be living in amends to my husband. And that means I'm going to love fiercely. And I think that's the fear of loving is lifted, right? The fear of that connection is lifted, because I don't know whether that person is going to be coming back in the door tomorrow. And so I'm going to be with them, and, I'm going to let them know as they walk out the door how much I appreciate them and love them and support them. Because I get how things don't always work out the way you want them to.
and Art is looking over you and speaking to you daily. So like, what's something that he said, that just resonates with you?
There's actually a couple of things. That's so sweet that you're asking. I love telling this story. So fire engines, I live in LA, a lot of fire engines, and they would go by. And one day I said to him, oh my God, they make me so nervous because I feel so bad because it means someone needs help. Like, I just feel like bad for that person. They're in trouble. They need help. And they had to call 911. And he said, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as go get them. Like, isn't it great that they're going to help? Isn't it great that someone called and they now know, they have comfort knowing someone's coming? And I didn't think anything of the conversation at the time. Really, it didn't change me. I wasn't like, oh, you're so right. What a great view. I still thought that the fear thought. Years after he died, it's been 14 years since he died. So I'm going to say about 10 years after, fire truck goes by. Oh, and he always says, go get him. In his head, he was always saying, go get him. And a fire truck goes by, and in my head, I just say, go get him. Right. And I just kind of keep saying it every single time. And then one time I pulled over, fire truck goes by, I say, go get him. And I burst out crying because I realized I had taken that was him inside of me. Right. There's little pieces of him. I didn't lose him. I gained. And it's so ingrained in me now that it is him, but it's also me. People now know me when I'm in the car with someone and the fire engine goes by, I say, go get them. Like, they see that as a Kim thing. So I take that. And then the last story I'm going to tell is my daughter was born at 8:20 p.m. And 8:20 p.m. every day for the first 3 years of her life, she screamed her head off. She would just lose. And people who have infants get it. There's nothing you can do to console her. She would just lose her mind at around that time. And Art would take her, this newborn baby, and he'd put her in the baby Bjorn. And we were living in Las Vegas. It was cold in the winter. And he would take this big green coat with the toggles in the front, and he'd put it on and wrap it around her, and he'd put his hood up, and he'd go walk the blocks with her. And sometimes he'd be back in 5 minutes, and sometimes he wouldn't be back for an hour. And this went on for 3 years. I mean, sometimes he would be carrying her, as she got bigger, but she would just lose her mind. And one time I said, honey, like, how do you not leave her at the side of the road? Because that's what I would do. I'd be like, you know what? I'm done. You'll be here. I'm going to walk away for 5 minutes. I'll be back. And then you'll start crying. He said to me, you just need to know you can outlast it. That's it. You just need to know you can outlast it. You have to have faith that you can outlast it. And that was something that I actually used a lot, especially after he died, quickly after he died, because that was sort of what the counting was, right? The counting was the idea that I could outlast it. And so that was something else that I learned, is that I can outlast it. I can outlast it. And that is definitely something from him, So I think those are the two for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah. How can we support 100 Acts of Love? Like, just plug 100 Acts of Love, what it all entails, where we can find it. If we're a company looking to beef up our grieving process, like, how can we go about that?
Well, first of all, LeTroy, thank you. That's always it's a really giving question, and it feels really good to be on the receiving end of that. So thank you very much. Couple things they can find. So I know I mentioned one phrase, never to say to anybody dealing with cancer or loss. There are actually 4 other that I put up on my website. And so they can download that. They can go to do that by going to 100 Acts of Love / what not to say. No spaces, no capitals, what not to say. Excuse me. And that's the number 100actsoflove.com. I always love a like or share on my posts. I'm on Instagram at 100 Acts of Love. I am on LinkedIn, there as well. I post videos, I post documents that people can download. I post, articles. So any support that people want to give there. And I think mostly it's really about sharing the information, because I think that we, when I talk to people, they're like, oh, we don't know anyone who's dying. I'm like, yeah, but do you know people who are grieving? And they're like, no. Oh, no, we do. right? So we just kind of forget that organizations are grieving right now. I mean, we're still dealing with the side effects of COVID, because COVID really didn't end till last year.
Right.
It was 2 years of kind of this sense of fear and discomfort. And we have people who are from all those deaths. There are a lot of people who are at work right now having lost people. There are a lot of people who have, I would just see if I can find this. I just wrote this new idea of what a definition of what grief is. So the grief is the missing of something, the continuous searching for and not finding a person or a thing, and the confusion and sadness that follows in not finding them. Right? So we grieve. It doesn't have to be the death of somebody. It could be the death of, we're now remote and we want to, it could be the opposite. I was once remote and now I'm back at work. And it's hard for me to be in an office with other people. That's grief, right? Mm-hmm. That's the searching for that solitude, to be able to go to your refrigerator at lunchtime, as opposed to pack your lunch in the morning and bring it with you. Right? So we grieved when we left the office. And it wasn't, it was such a collective grief. It wasn't really talked about, but the grieving of losing those connections of people that we care about that have shifted forever, that they won't go back to. So we're grieving that. We do grieve the loss of relationships, the changing of things. I mean, I'm grieving how traffic is back. It sounds so silly, but like, I just really enjoy taking 15 minutes to get someplace. And now it takes me 25. Right. And it's frustrating, but that frustration comes from that grief of that loss of that sense of freedom to be able to drive around LA, So I think just remembering that we're all grieving in some form or another. I serve companies in a couple different ways. I come in and speak at all hands and town meetings. I do trainings for managers, and I also do one-on-one coaching, usually for executive leaders, but also for any leaders who are dealing with employees, dealing with grief or any other kind of life hiccup. So that's how I can serve. But the most way people can help is just share the post. If you see something that really rings true with you, share it. If you have a question for me, please ask it. You reach out to me on Instagram or on in LinkedIn. And I love answering those questions, because you're not the only one who had that question.
Right. Well, 100actsoflove.com. Thank you, Kim, for such a powerful story. I mean, I think your work is the ultimate way of honoring art. And I'm sure, he's up there hiking, doing everything that he loves, and and saying, go get him to you.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. Well, Troy, I really love your spirit. There's something so open and curious, which is fitting for your podcast, and gentle about you. That makes it easy to be in this space with you. So really appreciate you.
I appreciate you as well. And like I said, 100 Acts of Love. We all need love. We all need support. We all grieve. And, there's no one way to grieve or to support those that are grieving. So, just extend a hand, a helping hand, and the world will be a better place. And for Stop Look and Listen, I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.